Okay, so hi and welcome to the bootcamp of the programming bootcamp of the Code-Maven programming bootcamp. My name is Gabor Sabo, and this course is usually something that I give at places like the Weizmann Institution, where my students are usually biotech students or chemistry students or students of life sciences and so on. And usually, so that's on one hand that I give this course this way. On the other hand, I have lots of things that I record videos. And in these videos, I usually sit alone next to my computer, and I try to talk into the computer. And that's also really, really strange. And this time, I'm going to try to record this video with the help of Nóra Doleschall, and I'll just in a second you'll introduce yourself and you tell us what you're doing, because she is actually in a way very similar to my usual students at the Weizmann Institute, and I think it's going to be really interesting to teach this programming bootcamp while I actually have an audience, and who is again quite similar in her background to my usual students. So Nóra, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, my name is Nóra, and I just finished my bachelor degree in biotechnology, and I'm actually doing a master's in precision medicine, which is actually very useful in this sense because it uses a lot of bioinformatics, and basically that's my reason of being here, to learn some basic programming skills that I can use in bioinformatics.
Yeah, can you tell a little bit about your background in programming? So you know what more or less what things you already know, and what kind of things yeah, I will have to explain.
I would call mostly myself a beginner because I only had like a few programming lessons in Python a year ago and I didn't really use the language ever since. I know like basic data forms or what sort of language Python itself is, but I really don't have a lot of background in this.
Okay, so in this, we call it bootcamp usually, which is mostly, in a large part, it's basically a Python programming course. But because it's aimed at people who don't have a programming background or didn't study computer science, but didn't write any. Usually, they didn't write any program beforehand. So, in addition to the regular programming part, first of all, the programming part is going to be in a way slower, because I'm going to get into all kind of explanations that people who don't have programming background yet. So if you're listening to the recording or watching the recording, then feel free to jump ahead if that's something that you already know in the areas, or if you're watching in a way that you can speed up the video. So it's not, I'm not telling it to you, Nóra, because you are stuck with me right now here, but and with my speed or my pace. But if someone is watching the video, feel free to speed up and watch the parts that you think you already know, because these areas are more relevant for people who are more beginner in the programming area. And we're also going to cover a couple of things like the parts of a computer, so people will understand a little bit more about what kind of computer, for example, to buy when they have a problem of speed, when the computer is not fast enough, and what can improve the speed. And we're also going to talk about something called version control. That is in my view, that's sort of part of the superpowers of programmers, because a version control system allows us to make experiments and fall back to the previous versions or earlier versions. And I usually joke about usually people understand my lack of understanding in chemistry, but if you take a chemist and you take two materials and put them together, you can't go back. Okay, so and so the experiments are probably also a lot more expensive in chemistry because of that. But the fact that you can't really go back to the previous state, so you will have to, if it's a process, you probably have to save enough material from the originals so you can so you can combine them again in a different way. And here in programming, if you use version control, and it's not just programming actually, it's also in other fields where you have text documents. If you use a version control system, that's also really, really great because you can create experiments and you can easily go back to your previous state and do something else. So that's another issue that we're going to cover. Now let me switch to, yeah, and then I think I have one more questions here. What kind of computer are you using? What operating system do you use? Do you have Mac
it's
or
Windows?
Windows, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So right now I'm also using Windows in this computer. So for now, at least, we're going to use Windows. Maybe at one point I'm going to also show some stuff on Mac and on Linux for those viewers, especially who use this kind of operating systems. But actually, especially Linux might be really interesting for everyone, you too, because in many environments, you might work on your Windows computer, but there is some, let's say, a cloud environment or a cluster of which is just basically lots of computers together, combined together to provide you a lot of computational power. Those are usually running Linux. And so then it can be useful to see and understand how the differences that there might be in order to run your programs on these operating systems, on these versions. So now I'm going to share my screen, and Nóra, just feel free anytime that you don't understand something or anything, just interrupt me. That's partially the whole point of having this way. That you will ask the questions that probably all the other people who are watching the video would ask. And
right.
And yeah, right.
I think for the first time I'll mute myself so any background will not bother us, and then if that's okay with you.
Yeah, sure. And just turn it on when you want to ask a question. Okay, so I'll just have to find the screen that I'm sharing. Yeah. So where is the Zoom window now? It's gone. So do you see my browser now, right? Okay, great. So this is just the opening site for the programming bootcamp. As I said, my name is Gabor Szabo. I usually write about stuff on the Code-Maven website, and I have a link here so I can show you how to arrive to the slides that I'm going to use. Because I'm going to use slides in this presentation, and of course I'm going to use a lot of live programming, and I'm going to give you all kind of exercises as well. But it's important that you know how to arrive to the slides. So there's this website which is called code-maven.com, and then I click on this one. I open it in a separate tab just so to keep this page. Now this is my website. The website for now, that's not that interesting for you. The point is that at the top in the menu, you will find the slides link, and there you get to all kind of my slides, so about all kind of subjects. And we'll go into various of these slides, and every time I'm going to tell you where we are talking, where we are at this point. But right now we are mainly going to talk about the Python programming part. So that's what we are going to do. Actually, so just I wanted to make sure that you see how to get to the slides when you would like to later on look at the slides and read the stuff yourself, maybe at a different pace. Now, before actually starting to talk about the programming of the Python part, let's talk a little bit about what do we do with computers. So we have this box, and then some way we're trying to interact with it. And most people are, especially people using Windows, are used to these applications like Word and for example Firefox or Internet Explorer, whatever Edge it's called now. And then it has menu options. And then where I don't even know where the menus are here. So you can, for example, the 3 dots here, and then you can have all kind of menu options. And that's how you control the computer. So basically that's how you tell through an application to the computer what to do. Okay. And but there is another way to do this. You can open a command window to the computer. So now I'm clicking on the Windows key and then just type in CMD, and that's the standard command line window that comes with Windows. And here you can I think usually by default it opens as a black window. Here on the top left side, you can click on this icon, and then with the properties, you can change the size of it and the color and the colors, and play around with it to make it comfortable when you need to use such a window. The point here is that here we can interact with the computer with words. So we can tell the computer, for example, dir, which will list the directory, the content of the current directory. So now, instead of going, okay, what Windows users usually do is they open the File Explorer, right? And then they look at with the File Explorer, they are looking for some directory, for example, this directory, and then whatever, let's say this directory, and then that's how they look at the content of a folder. And that's one of the ways to look at the content of a folder. But you can also, this different button, you can also go to the command prompt and there give all kind of commands. And for example, you would, now we can see here that in this location, so in the directory which is called C users Gabor Sabo, which is just my home directory, there are these things there are. So for example, there are these the folder which is called pictures, and there is a file called readme. I know it's a file because it doesn't have the dir here. And now I could say, so for example, cd, where should I go in? For example, I have this directory called work. So I can type in cd work and then change directory to this place. Now it's quite similar to what you would do in the File Explorer here, that you find the work folder and then you click and then you'll see exactly the same content, or more or less the same contents, not exactly, because the File Explorer usually hides some of the files that it thinks hidden. And in the command line, they usually show it all of them. But the cd command can get into there. And then you can type in a cd and 2 dots, and it goes back 1 directory up. Okay, and you can, there are all kind of commands, but this is basically a simple language, how Windows provides you basically to talk to your computer. Now, when we are talking about a programming language, this is very similar. You have a language, in our case, it's going to be Python. And with the language, you're going to give commands to the computer to do something, to do some computation, to read in the content of a file, to make some computation, and then print it to the screen. Okay, so this is the same thing. Now, with Python, you could write an application that has a GUI. GUI is a graphical user interface. So we have the menus and the buttons and all this. And you can do this, and we'll also look at those parts, but that itself is complex. So when we are starting out programming, we'll write programs and we'll use the command line to run the programs and to interact with the programs, because it's going to be simpler to interact with the programs that way. Also, if you're running something on a server, on that cluster or something, there you don't have a windowing system. You don't have a GUI. The only thing you have is some kind of a text to a window like this command line. Though there it's usually called a terminal on Linux or Mac operating systems. But basically it's more or less the same idea, where you can just give commands by typing in stuff. So here you don't really use the mouse too much. It's mostly typing in. So that's a little bit of background, and yeah, I will have to think about breaks and so on. But for now, we switch back to the Python slides and start going over them. And one thing that before I start going on, if you click on the question mark here on the keyboard, then you get a pop-up that will give you all kind of other keyboard shortcuts to use in the slides. One of them or two of them is the right arrow and the left arrow, which will go to the next slide and the previous slide. And this actually brings me to something else that I wanted to also tell you before we go on. So again, people especially used to Windows, they are used to drive everything with the mouse. It's sort of easy because you have icons and menu items and so on. But when you, for example, want to select the text, it might be more difficult because you have to align exactly how to select something. Using the keyboard, in many times, it starts to be a little bit slower than using the mouse. But when you get used to, and especially in various environments, it's going to be much easier to use the keyboard. So that's why I really recommend that people in general get used to the various shortcuts in the various environments. So for example, in these slides, you have a set of shortcuts that I just showed you. For example, in YouTube, this is something that I just recently learned. There too, you can press the question mark and then while you're watching a video, and then you get lots of keyboard shortcuts. And for example, you can stop the video with one keyboard press, and then you go back 10 seconds with another key, or go forward with another key, which is especially interesting and especially useful when you're watching something and you step, oh, just let me go back for a couple of seconds. If I was doing it with the mouse, I would play it with, and then usually don't do it correctly. Do go back way too much or way too little. With the keyboard, it's much easier. It just returns 10 seconds. So these things. Now, hopefully we start doing Python. So that's why you won't see me so much moving the mouse while moving forward in the slides, because I'm using the keyboard. Okay, so just step over the couple of first slides that were just listings of iders. So the question, first of all, what is Python? And of course, some people will say, biologists will say it's a snake. English people will say that it's a British comedy group, okay, the Monty Python. And then there are also two other things that we programmers can think about. One of them is the programming language that we are usually talk about. If you think what is a language, it's just like a human language, okay? It has words, it has a grammar, it has some punctuations, okay? So in a programming language, the punctuations, we usually call them operators. And instead of grammar, we usually call it syntax, even though the word grammar is also good. But basically, they're just some language to explain to the computer what I would like to do. So Python is one of these languages. But when we say Python, we sometimes also mean the tool, that's a program basically, that can translate my program, which I wrote in the Python language, to the language of the computer. Because in the end, the computer only understands zeros and ones. It doesn't understand any of the high level terms that Python has, for example. Okay, so we need something that can translate to the computer or commands in Python. And this something in many languages is either called a compiler or called an interpreter. We'll discuss what is the difference between why do we have two words for this. In Python, this is sort of both at the same time. For the layman term, I use the translator or something that can translate basically. The more professional or technical term is either compiler or interpreter. So when we say Python, we mean in the programming context, we mean either of the two lower ones, right, in this list. And by the way, even though the the standard icon of Python is a snake, in fact, the name actually comes from Monty Python. So whatever. Okay, so yeah, next slide. So what do we need in order to write a program? We need basically more or less two things, or at least in Python, we need two things. We need a text editor in which you will type in your program, okay? And this is a little bit like Word, except that Word specifically can't be used because when you type in Word, it will save all kind of extra information. So besides your actual text, it will save what kind of font you're using, if it's bold, and or all these things. And we don't care, the program doesn't care about it. So that's why Word it's not really good. Also, it's not good because Word, so in Word, you might have an English spell checker. You might even have an English more grammar checker, but it doesn't understand Python. And then there are other types of editors that are much better used for programming. There are simple editors that more or less understand languages, programming languages and general tools. And then there are what we call IDEs, or integrated development environments, that usually have a very deep understanding of specific programming languages. So you need an editor to type your code into, and you also need this compiler or interpreter that I just mentioned to translate your code into the language of the computer. So that's basically the two parts that you need. And I don't know if you're familiar with MATLAB or R or some environment like this. Nóra says no. Okay, good. In my courses, for example, in the Western Institute, some people come with a background of MATLAB or R, and they have some type of unlearning to do, because those tools, so for example, MATLAB, comes together. So both the editor and the compiler and the interpreter, everything is in one package. So those people who learned MATLAB earlier, they usually tend to feel that that's one thing. So they don't see the difference with the two parts. And in almost all other environments, you actually have two things, or at least two things, the editor and the compiler, okay? And when we are talking about an IDE that I mentioned, an integrated development environment, then again, you could see it as if it was just one unit. But you have to remember that these are actually two units, two really separate parts. Partially because when you write your program, you need the IDE. You need this environment, you need the editor, okay? You need the editor. But when you're running the program, you need only the compiler usually, okay? And in some cases, you don't even need that, because you already compiled it to something that itself can be executed, okay? So, and it's important to know this because, for example, when you distribute your program, you give it to someone else in the lab, or you want it to run on that cluster, you don't have the editor there. You don't have an environment, an editing environment there. You only have the running environment, which is usually, in the case of Python, this is the Python compiler interpreter, okay? In some other languages, you don't even need that kind of things. In Python, you need this. So here, this is just a link to the source code of Python. So again, I mentioned that Python is both the language itself and the compiler. So this is the link to the source code of the Python compiler. So the Python compiler is itself a program. Okay, it was written in a language called C. If I click here and if I manage to move away this part of the thing, yeah, okay. So this is the main website of Python. Okay, you can see the pseudo snakes here. And you can somewhere downloads, okay? You can download versions of Python that are already ready to be used on your computer, for example, on Windows, which is already the compiled version of Python, or you can go and download the actual source code. So that's how the people wrote the program, which is called Python. Okay, and what we are going to do in this course is we are going to write source code that is in the Python language. So unlike Python itself, which is written in C, we are going to write in the Python language. Actually, there are about, I don't know, I think about 800-900 different programming languages in the world. And 10, 20, 30 are the majority that they are used in most of the time. And Python is probably the first one these days, or the second one in popularity. But there are lots of these languages. So this is just to show you that you could actually get to the source code of Python. And actually that brings me to another point, that Python is being open source. So when you download the program for many corporations, what you get is only the already compiled version of the code. And you can run this program. You probably don't have the right to redistribute the program because of the licensing thing, but you definitely don't have the power to look at the source code of the program because that's proprietary of the company. Python is an open source compiler. It's an open source program. So therefore they give you the source code, and they also give you the rights to redistribute things. And this is an extremely important part in the whole Python world and all the world that we are going to learn now, because when you're writing program in Python, you're not only writing programs in the language, you're also using hundreds of external libraries. And they are all open source, which means that if they have a bug, you can actually go and fix them if you have the knowledge, okay? And soon you will have the knowledge, okay? So that, and that's a huge difference from a program that you would download from a corporation that's a proprietary software, and then if there is some problem, then you might ask them to fix, and they might fix it, but you have nothing to do. You can't do anything, okay? So I think we should have a break now, a little break. So I'll stop I'll try to find, okay, I'll stop the recording, and then we get back from this point in a couple of minutes, okay? Yeah.